Always love to get this guy in here and wishing him a happy new year from Pro Football Focus. Brad Spielberger at PFF_Brad. Brad, how we doing, my man?
Fantastic. How you guys doing?
We're doing well. We have a clean cap entering 2024 for our Arizona Cardinals. Now, the big question is when and how are they going to spend it? And, we were talking off air. They're fortunate in certain areas where they don't have a lot of guys in-house that they have to re-sign. Most of the talent, Brad, on this team, free agent, young players, rookie contracts. If there's a priority for the Cardinals with internally, if you look at this team and what they've got coming off the books, like, do you even see somebody worth like a multi-year contract at this point?
Good question. Probably no, right? We were just chatting a little bit about Marquise Brown pre-show, maybe a one-year flyer, let him bet on himself, kind of in line with his fifth-year option, frankly, right in that wheelhouse. But otherwise, no, I don't think there's any player that you say, oh, I'd love to get this guy back on a multi-year deal, even like a smaller stuff, like a Will Hernandez last year, which I thought was a good priority, a good guy to bring back in the fold. No, I don't see anyone on that list for this year.
How do we view Hollywood's market? I can't think of anybody in the NFL in a contract year that's hemorrhaged more money than Marquise Hollywood Brown the last couple of weeks. How are you seeing his market? Is it maybe in line with a team that's going to have just an absurd amount of cap dollars that can throw some money at him, or is he going to have to look at a prove-it deal at this point?
Yeah, it's tough, right? It is the worst timing to kind of miss games towards the end of the year. Maybe if there was some late year magic with his buddy and Kyler Murray, you could see a scenario where Arizona or somebody else kind of said, all right, let's take a gamble on this talent. Obviously, the Cardinals were willing to trade a first round pick for him, send the third back, whatever. But I think it is a one-year flyer route because I don't think there's going to be a strong multi-year offer in free agency. And I think it would be smart of him to say, all right, play 1 year on a one-year flyer, have a better year, a healthier year, more productive season in a better offense, and then see if you can cash in. Still not old, still has the ability to sign a 3, 4, 5-year deal. Right now, I think you look at the historic, like your Will Fullers, your the guys that had high pedigree, are talented, and have shown flashes, even last year for Marquise, stretches of games where he was getting targeted 10 plus times and all that. Bet on yourself 1 year. I have in our article, the free agent top 100 at PFF, 1 year, $12 million, and just try to cash in next offseason.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up like Will Fuller. It's a ghost of football past here. And it's like, does Hollywood go that route? Like, is he going to turn into kind of an irrelevant player in the NFL? He's been irrelevant for the Cardinals this year. I hope he can get healthy and help himself, but he just, to where we cover this team, Brad, he just doesn't fit what they want to do. They want these big physical receivers. And I think the better route, frankly, is to look at somebody like Tee Higgins or Gabe Davis. Let's start with Tee Higgins in the free agent market. Like, do you think that the Cincinnati Bengals are actually going to let him leave? And if so, like, what kind of contract is a player of that caliber looking at?
So the only way he leaves is a tag and trade scenario, in my opinion. So you're giving up draft capital to get him. I don't think they're going to just let him walk in free agency. Look, you're giving up probably a first round pick. I would say a little bit more pricey than a Marquise Brown. Again, that was the 25 for him and 100, I think was the exact trade or something like that. You're probably giving up a first and a third. It's not, it's not 2 firsts or it's not anything crazy like that. I wouldn't even say it's a first and a second, but yeah, I mean, he's a, 6 foot, 4, 225 pound, like outside guy, can be a number one, a different caliber of player. And then I think you're giving him, especially with the added trade leverage, it starts with the 2, probably 22, 23, $24 million a year. Look, he hasn't had a good year. He's also been hurt in his own right. But kind of it's interesting. The flip side, he comes back from injury. Jamar Chase goes down, and he's been balling out now for the last 3 weeks. Had 100 plus in a score last week. I want to say the week before he did as well. So yeah, it's a hefty price tag for a Tee Higgins.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this wide receiver market, and it's there's some star power there. But then the question, like we're talking about with Higgins, is does he become available? Michael Pittman Jr., it seems like it's inevitable that, he either gets tagged or gets a multi-year deal from his current club, the Indianapolis Colts. But then you look at Jacksonville, there's Calvin Ridley. They spent, draft capital to bring him in, but they've also got Josh Allen who could be hitting the free agent market. Does that become maybe an opportunity for the Cardinals? Because they've got to make upgrades all over this roster between Allen and Ridley. Who would they likely tag if they can't work out an extension?
Yeah, they handled that really poorly and just backed themselves into a very bad scenario. And maybe they can find a way to extend Josh Allen before the tag, but he has so much leverage if he knows, hey, we're trying to get this deal done so we can tag Calvin Ridley. And the interesting wrinkle there is, as a part of the trade to Atlanta, or from Atlanta, I should say, if the Jaguars only franchise tag Calvin Ridley, it doesn't elevate the third round pick to a second round pick that they're sending the Falcons this year. If they sign him to an extension, they then owe them a second round pick in this year's draft, not a third rounder. Kind of a funny little wrinkle there. It was the same with Leonard Williams when we went from the Jets to the Giants. That's why the first year they just tagged him and just let it play out. So they didn't give a better draft pick. That's not why they did it, but obviously it was a factor. So I think that they need to tag Josh Allen because someone signing him, I think, in the neighborhood of like $28-30 million a year, if he reaches the open market, I think you have to tag that player. And I think it does open the door for Ridley to leave because he's been okay this year at times, but I'm not sure I'm giving him a strong deal at 29 and then sending a better draft pick as a result. Don't buy into that sunk cost. You made a splash. You try to get Trevor Lawrence, a good young receiver. It worked out okay, and you just kind of move on.
What about somebody like Gabe Davis? You think about super productive at times, and then he has these lulls, these stretches where he doesn't have catches in games, and then he'll pop off for like 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Do you think that he's somebody that could command upwards of $20 million per year, or is he somebody that may be better off staying in Buffalo?
Yeah, I don't. So it's funny. The perfect example. He had 0 catches in 4 of 6 games, and then last week had like 6 for 100 and something and a score. And like that's been him his whole career. He had the year of the playoff game where he had 200 plus yards and 4 touchdowns. On the season, he had like 700 yards and like 7 touchdowns. So it was like half his production came in one game. So and then you add in the fact that like what quarterback is going to better untap like a 17-yard average depth of target, like doesn't create separation, big body outside receiver besides a Josh Allen? Like who's going to get more out of that guy than Josh Allen? I don't really know. So doesn't start with a 2. I think he's definitely more in kind of the mid-tier range, 13, 15, whatever. Again, you get to the market, things can always get crazy. Your price can skyrocket. I always tell this anecdote now. I had Christian Kirk originally at like $12 or $13 million a year. I had some agents that were like, you're insane. You're way too high. He's going to get like 10, 11, and then he got 18. So we were all wrong. I was just less wrong. So anyway, yeah, so you never know. But yeah, Gabe Davis to me he's just like, he disappears at times. You look at his like in breakers, he has like lousy footwork, like doesn't snap off routes. He's just a vertical outside threat. And like I said, Josh Allen getting 800 yards out of him. Who's going to get more than that out of him?
I want to get to the Gannon story this week as he returns to Philadelphia and the Eagles fans continue to cry, tampering and all this. But before we do that, I want to, because we love Monty Austinfort here at the show, but I want to put you in Monty Austinfort's chair this offseason. If you were to prioritize free agents for this Cardinals organization, who are you eyeing right out of the gate early March?
I think we are talking about the right positions here. Like, I think receiver makes a ton of sense. I think they would look in that direction. And then for me, I look interior defensive line. I don't know who's going to get out. Justin Madubuike is going to be the big ticket name, the guy that everyone's going to be after. I think he's going to sign a gigantic contract, and maybe Baltimore just ends up tagging him. But he's a difference-making, force multiplier player at this point, has had a remarkable year. And another kind of side conversation of free agency I love to have, I get asked a lot, like, do you think this is a contract year breakout because the player is in a contract year trying to get money, or are they just like the game's slowing down for them, things are clicking, they're just better? And I think Madubuike falls in that second bucket. He's always been a high effort guy, high motor guy, a lot of pursuit tackle, stuff like that. I think there's just more kind of nuance to his game, more counter, pass rush moves, all that. It just all kind of clicked with Mike McDonald. So yeah, receiver and interior defensive line. And then obviously they just waived Marco Wilson. So probably, corner, I think if you can get one of those guys as well.
Real quick, Brad, educate me and our audience as it relates to like the timeline with Kyler Murray, his money this offseason, because the way I've understood it previously is that we would know a decision on Kyler Murray's future well before the draft because they would have to potentially trade him well before the draft. If they're picking 1 or 2, for no pun intended, they're going to have to show their cards, right, by trading Kyler Murray?
You would think so. So 5 days into the new league year, so around March 20th or so, you will have the 2025, his salary and his roster bonus become fully guaranteed. So like you're kind of taking away a decision from another club if they want to restructure something or if they want to, navigate a new deal, whatever. Then maybe it doesn't happen, and Kyler he is not open to that. But you just want to give a new team, in theory, as much optionality as possible to kind of navigate that conversation. So yeah, I always say, like you saw with the Stafford trade and most of the quarterback trades, they happen in like February, right? They don't actually get, executed, Carson Wentz, etc., until later on. Rodgers kind of the exception. That was an extremely unique case. But for the most part, yeah, because the team wants to know by day one of free agency how much is earmarked for a quarterback, because everything else spills out from there. So yeah, certainly before the draft, if they end up with the top 2 pick and they're sitting there saying, we love the 2 quarterbacks that everyone's talking about, Caleb Williams and Drake May, and we think we're going that route, you'll probably start having phone calls the day the season ends to kind of figure out the market and gauge the interest in a Kyler Murray.
How do you evaluate Kyler through 6 games and maybe what the team should do this offseason, whether they have the first pick, the second pick, or the third pick? Obviously we talk about all the holes on this roster. You create another one if you decide to move off of Kyler.
So look, like it obviously hasn't been pretty, but I think there are some positives to point to that I think you can kind of allocate to Kyler specifically. So, our early down performance is more stable than late down performance, but he has been very good on 3rd and 4th down, 40 of 62, 464 yards, 4 touchdowns to just 1 pick on 3rd and 4th down, a high conversion rate. He's been good in the red zone, 11 of 18 for 80 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, on the whole, it hasn't been great. I think that part of it too is he's been scrambling a little bit, but I think still less than we're normal seeing from him. And I think teams know that he's not trying to take off as often and are just he's not getting as favorable of looks, maybe fewer open throwing windows, because I think teams are not keeping in QB spies and not doing different things that normally helps him out and creates more throwing opportunity for him. So yeah, like it hasn't been great, but at the same time, we mentioned no Marquise Brown. It's really, obviously no Michael Wilson for stretches too. It's kind of been Trey McBride and kind of a patchwork. And then the O-line has been, I think, improving, but still not a great unit. So I think you can go either direction. I wouldn't nitpick either way. If they kept him, I would say, you know what? I understand it. He's still a very, very good player. Caleb Williams or Drake May turning into Kyler Murray is still, people forget about this stuff. We fall in love with prospects. Like those guys turning into Kyler Murray is still a 90th percentile outcome in the NFL. Like it's the guy, these guys fail. I know they're fun and we love them. We watch the college tape, but that happens. So on the flip side, though, I would also be fine with, hey, we're starting over the rookie contract, quarterback window. We have the extra first-round pick from Houston, yada, yada, yada. I think both options are valid.
What do you put, speaking of that pick from Houston, the value of that pick has gone down dramatically than what we thought. I mean, the Bears, reaped the benefits of Carolina being incompetent this year with potentially the first overall pick. We thought Houston was going to be top 5, top 10 at the worst. Now they could be knocking on the door for a playoff berth. Like, do you see value with that pick this year in potentially moving it for a veteran like we talked about, like a Tee Higgins, maybe like a pass rusher that they then could say, okay, elite player in your mid-20s, here's a contract? Or given the lack of quality depth on this team, they need everything. Are they better off just saying, this is a good draft class, we should just stick and pick a tackle, a defensive lineman, a corner, and let the chips fall where they may? Are the Cardinals, I guess, in a position where they should be trading a late first for a veteran player?
Good question. I think, again, normally you probably would make the case of like they have so many holes to fill, so why not just stay cheap, all of that. But if you are going to go the direction of keeping Kyler, let's say, why not go trade that first for a Brian Burns or whatever, insert player here, address a glaring need, and don't take the potential of that pick not going like you thought it was going to be higher. It isn't. It's not a top 10 pick. Maybe you don't love the class later on. And again, like all these arguments are often why teams kind of make some poor decisions. But I think if it lines up well, receiver, edge rusher, whatever, and you think it makes sense, then I think you could go that route. I do like the class, though. Like, I think there's going to be talent in the teens.
Yeah.
Like, I really, really do. So, but yeah, no, I think it's a very fair question because there are some names in particular that I think could be available, like a Tee Higgins, like a Brian Burns, kind of top of my head. And maybe it's worth it just going that direction.
Now let's get into this weekend's matchup. And, we're seeing a Philadelphia defense that has struggled mightily, especially over the last, 5-6 games. And we're seeing all the headlines, hearing all the sound bites from Philadelphia, talk radio. And we're seeing some real soggy hoagies in people's, Philly cheesesteak sandwiches because they're crying still about the tampering charges that the Arizona Cardinals were able to figure out on draft night. How do you view this? Did Jonathan Gannon, did he ruin everything in Philadelphia? He cost them the Super Bowl. He cost them Vic Fangio. He's a bad man, and he needs to pay on Sunday. How do you see this playing out? Or how did you see it play out for Gannon and crew?
It's going to be very fascinating. Like, I think we will learn a lot about how everyone feels about that. If Philly is like still trying to score late in the fourth quarter of this game, like I thought it was interesting when Mike McDaniel was up, 35-3 against the Commanders and scored. He ran the ball on 4th and goal to score a touchdown. I was like, okay, clearly he didn't love his time in Washington. Like stuff like that, I think does jump out. So maybe we will see some of that. Is it chippy? Are they scoring late? Whatever. My understanding, though, is that they love Gannon in that building. Obviously they were not happy with him talking, before the Super Bowl happened. Clearly, they got draft pick compensation for a reason, and it had to be kind of bad because, newsflash, like it happens every offseason. Guys are probably talking too early. Clearly it was maybe further than a lot of people go. But everyone I've spoken to there was like, the guy is an energy guy. We knew he was going to be a head coach. We love him. I didn't meet him in Minnesota, but we crossed paths in Minnesota, and everyone said the same thing there. Like, I think he's a good guy. But yeah, I mean, I think we will learn a lot about how they feel about that whole thing. But no, I don't think that he was so distracted he didn't game plan for Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that it just the field turf stunk, and it was a bad matchup because of the quick pass rush not getting home, things of that nature. And I think Gannon is probably sitting there saying, I clearly wasn't that bad because look at the defense this year.
Yeah. I mean, they got Philadelphia this weekend, then they have Seattle, who's in the playoff mix in week 18. We talked about it on yesterday's show. This is a team that still could end up picking first overall. We chatted briefly about the Denver Broncos off air, and you think about like the rebuild timeline for the Cardinals. Do you feel like the Cardinals are taking this rebuild in full stride? Do you think that they're going about it the right way? Like the new GM, new head coach, clearing the books, multiple picks, whereas some of these other franchises, for better or worse, middling 5-6 wins every year. Like, would you sign up for the Cardinals being a team on the rise this offseason should they push the right buttons?
Yes, 100%. I think Monty Ossenfort has had one of the best first off seasons for a GM I've seen in a while, of just understanding where you're at and building through the context of where your roster starts. They could have tried to, and I know Kyler was hurt, but they could have tried to be like, hey, you know what, we're close. And, a lot of the things we heard from Kai in the last couple of years, they could have sold themselves that bill of goods. And, coaches come in, GMs come in, and they think like we always as fans, like, oh yeah, just tank, it'll be fine. I'm like, no, they're now sitting there saying my record as the top dog is 2-13 or whatever it is. Like, that doesn't leave you, when you move throughout your NFL career. But I think that they, trading back and getting extra capital, all the things they did just showed to me they understood the long-term vision here. We probably talked about like taking a BJ Ojulari and a Garrett Williams, guys that you knew weren't going to play in week 1, but you thought their talent maybe was better than the draft slot because of injury, stuff like that. Like, everything to me seemed long-term, and I think that was the appropriate approach. Yeah, I'm bullish on them going forward. No matter what they do at quarterback, whatever. I like what they're doing, the direction they've shown. I like the coaching staff too. I know it's been ugly, but I consistently see, we talk about it, scripted plays, red zone, areas where coaching can show up. They've been good. It's just the talent is not there yet.
You've been so generous with your time, but I want to sneak one more question in because Adam Hogue, great host of CHGO Bears, told us last week that if Cardinals fans wanted Marvin Harrison Jr., the safest team to select first overall is the Chicago Bears. Do you share that sentiment with Hogue?
Yeah, I do. It's just like the decision is being made for Chicago. Like, you can't pass on quarterback at 1.01 2 years in a row. I know it's not their own pick. I mean, their own's still going to be top 10. But yeah, I think that's fair. I don't see a scenario where Chicago gets the first pick from Carolina and does not take a quarterback.
Love to hear that. Love to hear his work at profootballfocus.com at PFF_Brad. Brad Spielberger, friend of the program. Thank you so much for the time today, my guy.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.